Hi guys, welcome back to another video. So today is Monday, therefore it means that we are going to be working in the sketchbook today. And to kind of get like a little bit of a head start, I already went ahead and did my sketches in kind of like uni red colored lead to do my sketches because I wanted to kind of like sketch a bunch of things off screen, and then we can go ahead and do line work and any coloring. So with that being said, I am going to be doing a spread or two using water-based markers. Now I have this old kind of sketchbook journal that I was going to use for my Japan trip in 2019, but I ended up not using it. So I am repurposing it for my water-based marker swatches alongside with any of my planning for color palettes with water-based markers. So you can see these are all my water-based marker swatches, and then on the next few pages I'm going to use them just to plan out any color combinations that I want to, because in the past I would actually use scrap pieces of paper for my color swatches, but I feel like I'm using too many scraps at this point, that I'm accumulating so many strips that I kind of want to keep them in one place and potentially reference them in the future if I want to use certain color combinations once again. So I'm going to keep them all in that book for now, and we'll see how that goes for the next probably a few months, that I'm going to kind of use it back and forth in conjunction with the sketchbook whenever I want to plan out any marker drawing sessions. So in terms of who I'm drawing today, I am drawing Albin Noox from Nijisanji En, and he is a VTuber, and I haven't drawn him in a little bit, nor have I been kind of keeping up with a lot of my usual Oshis that I have in any of the VTuber spheres, but I've been kind of getting back into it more recently, so I was able to kind of like get that spark to draw them once again in my sketchbook or to doodle them every so often. And I haven't really gotten a chance to draw certain outfits for some of the members or the livers, so I wanted to take the opportunity just to get a little bit of a closer look once again at one of his more casual looking outfits, which I think is super cute. So the color combination that I decided to choose for today's spread is more on the kind of like warmer, earthier side, I guess. Or not exactly earthier, it's just more on the warmer side. So I picked more of a highlighter orange-ish color, and then I chose kind of like a mid-tone, kind of just not exactly chestnut brown, it's kind of like a warm potato brownish color. And then after that I'm going to be using a kind of a darker muted brown for the line work and any of the darker areas. So this is kind of like typically how I like to use water-based markers in my sketchbook, but you can see that I'm being a little bit more conscious of where I'm placing my colors a little bit. So for Albin's kind of like chunkier sweater t-shirt material, that's like the oversized shirt, I guess is what I'm going to call it. I guess the one on the very right is kind of like more streaky, and the pattern's very apparent in terms of how I place the marker streaks. And the reason being is that you'll see in a different session a little bit later, probably at the end of the video, I will be showing you a different method of how I was going to use the water-based markers, but the way that you're seeing currently is more or less how I like to use them. So I would do my sketch in pencil or a colored pencil or whatever you want to, and then I would cover certain areas with maybe anywhere between, I guess, like more or less 3 to 5 colors. I would like to keep it in the 3 to 4 range, and then my 4th and 5th color can be the line art, which tends to be the darkest color that I pick for my color palette. And the reason why I don't like doing line work beforehand is kind of more or less for 2 reasons. One is that because they're water-based markers, it's much easier for me to do the line work afterwards so that the markers don't reactivate themselves and won't smudge alongside with the already placed down markers. So you can see that right now I'm going ahead and doing kind of like a sketchier version of what I would consider line work for these kinds of drawings, because I do treat them more like sketches. I don't want to keep them super like pristine. I don't really care about things overlapping or, you know, tangent in lines and all that. So I can kind of just mess around and kind of play around with line width a little bit. If I want to add more value, I want to add less detail, more detail, I can kind of make that choice on the spot. But the second reason why I don't really like doing line work before I do any of like the color blocking and stuff with water-based markers, or just like coloring in general usually, is that I like having the freedom of being able to choose how much detail or like what I choose to line at the moment, which is something I talked about just like shortly before I started talking about this. But I don't really like the feeling of coloring within like a coloring book-esque kind of line work if I don't really need to, or unless I find that the line art is going to be very pertinent in terms of the process. So sometimes I'll do it if I want to do more of a detailed piece and I want to be able to color without worry about losing my sketch. Then that would be a reason why I would want to keep my line work and probably do my line work before coloring. But because I'm using all of the same mediums, like I said, I don't want to reactivate the inks with one another, especially if I put down a dark line work and use a lot of lighter colors. I don't want the lighter colors to be mingling and getting muddy with the darker line work because they'll tend to smudge a lot and drag that color. And not only that, I feel like it would make your marker tips very dirty, and I would like to keep the colors of my markers a little bit more pristine and not really kind of tainted by another color, just because it would be easier for me to keep the colors a little bit more accurate if they are not contaminated by another pigment. So in terms of how I like to do the line work too, usually I start with the face and I keep them as clean as I can, but I do like adding more detail towards either the face, where I can add detail probably to the eyes if it's a little bit larger. But other than that, I usually keep the eyes fairly simple just because my doodles tend to be on the smaller side. And then I like to add kind of like details to the hair, so I try to add as many strands as I can, kind of get that quality where I don't really want to chunk everything into big areas. I kind of want to break them down to make them a little bit more, I don't know, like a little bit busier in a sense, because if my colors are kind of like big and chunky and very simple, I kind of want the line work to be able to pull everything together. And that's like one reason why I really like doing this method a little bit more, because I get the opportunity to choose that instead. But when I do line work first and I color in the line work, I feel like I get a little bit lazy, so maybe it's my own tendencies. You'll see in a little bit when I do my second session that I tend to make the coloring a little bit more simple, or I don't really get to play around with the shapes as much, or I'm trying to keep things within the lines and making sure that nothing really strays away from the line work, which is really why I don't like that kind of like coloring book-esque kind of method of working with water-based markers or some of my other mediums that I like to work with traditionally. But I will be showing that version as well, because there are some things that I feel like is a little bit fun in terms of doing that method rather than doing the line work afterwards. But for me, also, I kind of get to pick and choose the line work a little bit more easily this way too, so I don't have to worry about things being I guess like not too dark or too light, depending if I don't want certain pigments to kind of intermingle with one another. So in terms of choosing kind of like my color palettes, I tend to like having one lighter color, and then usually it'd be ideal either having one or two mid-tone colors. So this is why I usually say that I kind of have anywhere between 3 to 4, and 5 tends to be pushing it a little bit, but sometimes I do need that extra color for either pushing more of the darker areas, or I feel like 5 colors would just help distribute a little bit more easily among the different doodles and stuff. But typically, the last color that I choose is the color that I use for the line work, which I like to make it the darkest color in the color palette. Just because, like I mentioned earlier, I like using the line work to kind of tie everything together at the very end. So it's kind of nice to have a darker color that kind of pops a little bit. And some people might be a little bit confused on why I used water-based markers much more often than alcohol markers, even though I have access to those. And the main reason is it's just a little bit easier, and I don't really have to worry too much about bleed through. Not only that, because I don't really like carrying around too many art supplies or thinking a lot about like certain spreads, it's easier for me to focus on one medium. And luckily these markers have dual-ended tips, so on one side it has like a brush tip, and then the other side has kind of like this fine liner, so it makes it a little bit easier for me to use the brush tip to fill in a lot of the chunkier areas, any of the areas I want more solid color, and then I can switch to a darker color and use the fine liner side to do the line work. So this way I can kind of match the line work a little bit closely with my color palette rather than always being stuck with, let's say, a brown or a black for everything, because brown and black tend to be the easiest colors to find in fine liners, I believe. Or unless you're like into doing like dip pens and those kinds of ink where you get to choose from a variety of different inks. But then, you know, for me, I just don't feel too comfortable using a dip pen quite yet. So maybe that's something I can explore in the future. But I think that's pretty much it in terms of this kind of little doodling method that I really like to do. I tend to start with the lighter color, and I like to add that usually to the face and kind of plan out some of the areas that I want to be softer. And then the mid-tone color tends to be the majority of my color palette, and hopefully it complements nicely with my lighter color, and then hopefully my darker color just helps tie everything together. And it works well if I have any like black areas or really dark areas that need to be filled in a little bit more, that I can use my darker colors. So for the piece for Albin, or the entire spread, he does have black pants, but he has like a dark apron as well. And instead of doing the apron in the same color as everything else with that kind of mid-tone brown, I decided that I wanted to do that as well, kind of more in a hatching kind of scribbly motion to kind of fill it in so that we can get a little bit of a darker area, but also just filling in a little bit of texture here and there, because if everything is kind of that same flat color, it will get a little bit too, I don't know, like muddled together in a sense, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. But the last thing I wanted to do, so because the orange was super light and it didn't really pop out, and it was a little bit too highlighter-y for me, I guess I didn't really notice it when I was actually doing the color swatches, because it was kind of wasn't used as prominently in the entire spread. I decided to fill in the little white areas around him with the same kind of lighter orange. It's kind of light enough that it won't really disrupt, but I feel like because it was already around him and kind of in the piece, it kind of fits nicely. So this is kind of what the overall look for the spread looks like. So kind of cute. The color palette's not exactly my favorite, but I feel like it just suits the overall aesthetic for what I wanted in the first place. So here are some other versions, and I'm gonna show you guys how I did these ones because I was kind of intrigued by a Pinterest post that I saw, and unfortunately I cannot find it for the life of me. I've been trying everything. I've been searching similar terms that I searched before to see if I can find the same kind of like image pipeline to get to the post that I saw. So I'm pretty sure the one that I saw was a blue and pinkish reddish color together, and they did it very kind of like methodically in terms of how they place their water-based marker streaks, kind of only in a vertical motion. And I believe it's like a girl sitting with her back facing towards us, and she's just like placed in a room, like it's either the living room or bedroom or something. And I just really liked the aesthetic of it because it was very much just two-toned colors, but the way that they placed their marker and filled in spaces was just one direction of streaks, which I really liked, but also they were able to show a lot more depth and kind of like where the light was hitting and stuff because of the two-tone colors. So I wanted to try that, and I think I did a better attempt of this in my previous sketchbook. I think it's like the third or fourth last page in my sketchbook, and I did a combination of yellow and kind of more of a muted minty color, like a minty grayish blue, and I really liked that one. But for these ones, I feel like I did not understand what exactly I liked from that Pinterest post until I'm starting to think about it more right now, which is actually being able to kind of like plan out the form a little bit more. Because when you get to see me place down the colors for the blue and yellow, oh, by the way, I'm drawing Ike Eveland because I was gonna draw all my Oshis for today's video, but the video would have been too long, and I didn't really like how I did Reimu's page, so I'm deciding that I wouldn't include all four of them. So I'm just gonna show you Albin's page, and I'm gonna show you Ike's page. But I'm kind of doing the other method that I mentioned earlier. So after I did my sketch, I went ahead and pulled out my Ohuhu fine liners, and I'm going ahead and doing the inking process first. And these are waterproof markers, so there will be no problems with coloring over top of these lines. I also have used this in my previous sketchbook, so I know that they won't reactivate. It's always good to test out your materials and your art supplies beforehand before you commit to a spread or a piece that you know you want the piece to look okay, if that makes sense, because you don't want like any kind of like smudging, smearing, anything like that to be unexpected. So do test things out prior, preferably on the same kind of material or paper that you've been trying to use it on for your finished piece. So it's just good practice to keep in mind, unless you don't mind having a little bit of, I guess, like happy accidents or surprises. I was hoping that the kind of like energy that I had for Inktober would kind of like transfer to today's little inking session, but I can tell even the way how I was inking Ike in the first place that I was getting a little bit lazy here and there, especially for some of the other doodles, kind of like as we move across from right to left. So I definitely spent the most time on the first two, and then as we got smaller and further away, I started to kind of get tired of inking. So kind of if I did the first method, I would kind of like pick and choose areas I really wanted to focus on. But for something like this, I feel like I always have to put an immense amount of detail into everything kind of like equally, which is something that probably easily drains my energy from wanting to even doing more inking work or anything like that. But in terms of the process, so after I did basically kind of like simple inking for everything, I went ahead to switch over to a thicker fine liner, which is I think the 1.0. So initially I think I was using the 0.2. So when I switched over to the larger one, I am going ahead and kind of like outlining each of the individual little ikes here so that they're separate from one another. I did not ink the outline for the quildren, which is like the little puff ball with the feather at the very top, because I feel like it needed to be a little bit more delicate, so I didn't really want to do that to them. But after that, we are going ahead and doing the kind of like weird color blocking in a sense. So I feel like this would have worked better if I planned out some of the shapes a little bit better in terms of following the forms in a more 3D way. So I think I had the right idea on the very first Ike, which is the one on the left, but as you can see, as we're moving along to the other ones, I'm making them very simple and making the yellow only hug certain edges, which makes sense if I have like a light source hitting a certain side, but it would have been nice for me to focus a lot more on the form so that we can kind of get that feeling of the form and the depth of each piece or like part that the light is hitting. So it would have been nice to do that before I placed on the blue. And in my previous one that I did in my other sketchbook, I actually planned out where I wanted to place the shadows for the most part, and I placed the shadows first before adding any highlights or any kind of rim lighting. Or in this case for the other one, I actually added the warmer color or the lighter color alongside the edges of my cooler color, which is why I think I approached this one kind of like in the opposite way, but with the same intention. So I wanted to block out a lot of Ike's form and like the clothing and everything with the yellow, just to make sure that on the opposite side I would fill everything up until the yellow with the blue, which I think I realized that I made everything too blue too quickly. So I don't know, it doesn't look terrible, and I feel like I can use this to my advantage in the future, but there's something I do like about it. It's just, I know I could have approached it a little bit more effectively, if anything, if I wanted to kind of focus on creating the forms, even though I'm kind of using a very flat method of applying color. But I do like how organized, I guess it feels, if I do everything almost with like a vertical bar or a vertical strip of color. It just makes things seem a little bit more organized rather than my really messy application usually of how I placed water-based markers. So if you guys get this far into the video, do let me know what other mediums you want me to use in my sketchbook a little bit more frequently. I know I've asked this in previous sketchbooks, but I never really adhered to it because I'm very mood driven in terms of what I use in my sketchbook. So yeah, maybe I will actually follow through this time, because even though my previous sketchbook, I definitely had preferences, I'm trying my best to fill the sketchbook a little bit more frequently in terms of when I do a spread, but I'm trying to do a little bit more revisiting different mediums that I've used in the past and how I've used them. So I kind of wanted to revisit water-based markers once again, since I didn't really use them towards the end of my previous sketchbook. So here are the last little looks of my doodles of Magicfly. These are the ones of Albin, and I think that's it for today's session. So I will see you guys next time in the next video, which will be Wednesday, which will be the redrawing your OCs video. So I'll see you guys then. Bye!